Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm Rebecca Forrest, a behavior analyst and supervisor of the high school and S9 programs at the Marlton campus. I want to welcome you to our second to last event of the Spring Speaker Series. In past sessions, parents have learned about adult services available through the New Jersey Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, DVRS. You've also heard from experts about screen addiction and how to manage challenging behaviors in the home setting. Tonight, our presenter will discuss accessing residential services and housing for individuals with developmental disabilities. I've seen Lisa present previously at an Autism New Jersey conference and thought she was amazing. Lisa McCauley-Parles is a partner in the Springfield, New Jersey law firm, Parles Reckham LLP, and the parent of a young adult with severe autism, adult son. Her practice focuses on representing individuals with disabilities and their families in the areas of special education, transition and adult services, residential placements, and guardianships. In addition to representing individuals with disabilities and their families, she has also represented numerous not-for-profit organizations in the disabilities community. Lisa is a frequent lecturer and has appeared in a number of broadcasts, including Nightline and World News Tonight. She has participated as a panelist and moderator for numerous continuing legal education seminars. Lisa was an invited expert on the United States General Accountability Office's panel in Washington, D.C., entitled Youth with Autism, Transitioning to Adulthood in 2016. She has also been an invited speaker before the New Jersey State Senate Legislative Oversight Committee, as well as the New Jersey State Assembly Human Services Committee. She was an invited speaker at the United Nations for World Autism Day in 2017. She successfully advocated for changes to New Jersey's statewide transition plan in order to ensure that a full array of services and choices are available to the developmentally disabled. In addition, she currently serves as a member of the National Council on Severe Autism. Without further ado, I would love and can't wait for all of you to hear her presentation. Also, just to make note, we will take, there'll be plenty of time to answer questions. You can put them in the chat and I'll be moderating so that she can answer your questions at the end of her presentation. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you to Yale for inviting me to talk about this important topic. Let me just say two things before we turn to the slides. One is that of all those things that I've done, the one that I think is the most important is the fact that I'm the mother of a soon-to-be 31-year-old son with severe and challenging behaviors and complex medical needs. As you know, that type of diagnosis just shapes and affects every part of your life. The second thing I wanted to talk about is that I know how overwhelming this can be, and I do this for a living. So from a parent's perspective, where you don't have the time or the opportunity to be involved in, so many of the task force and committees that are looking at it, it can be overwhelming. I am a believer, though, in giving parents a lot of information and then taking a step back and letting them ask questions. I used to run the leadership program at Seton Hall, and I still, teach in the business school. I get a lot of pre-law students. So one thing that I always tell them is, don't ever forget how overwhelming the experience is from a client perspective. So we can just walk up the courthouse stairs and, it doesn't really feel like anything, where, for a family, it's terrifying. And the one story that I like to share is that I do have a lot of clients that, now that I'm getting older, I think 87 was my graduation year from law school, which I just we moved our office and I put the diploma on the wall and thought, oh my goodness, I'm getting old. But that we do have a lot of clients that have been with us for all stages, for an insurance fight or a school district fight. And now, of course, there's more and more of them where we're looking at graduation or transition issues, pre-vocational, and most importantly, adult services and beyond. And I like to always tell my students the story of that, I had one client that honestly has been with me longer than anyone. And she told me after years and years of, working with her, that she told me that every time she comes to see me, that she drinks an entire bottle of Maalox. And I was just horrified and thought, my God, that's terrible. Like I'm supposed to be here supporting you and helping. And she told me, no, that's okay. She said, you know, I just preparing myself, but I will say the one thing you always do is after you tell me everything, we back up and you tell me these are the next 2 things we're going to do. So I just want you to realize that I do appreciate that this is going to be very overwhelming, but I am a big believer in let's just get through a lot of material and then spend some time talking, which we'll try to do. So with that, I would just ask Gabriella if she could put the slides up. Okay, so that's the intro. So next slide, please. Okay, so obviously, no, there's really no need to even mention this statistic, but obviously there's a rising prevalence rate of autism and the need grows every year. According to the Autism Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Unit, which is under the auspices of CDC and has a very renowned unit within New Jersey, the current rate for children is 1 in 55 nationally, but in New Jersey, it's 1 in 32 and 1 in 20 boys. So we can see also too, in terms of the projections from that unit, is that the need increases. And we already have a housing crisis in New Jersey. It's a challenging hurdle for even typical people, because we do in New Jersey spend more money on our housing needs, so, you know, greater percentage of our income and resources than in other states. So it's really a very, very pressing need. My goal today is to cover some key terms, some policy procedures, and discuss some successful advocacy efforts. So we will end on a positive note and have an opportunity to share some ideas. But again, I do, you know, recognize that we're putting a lot of information in here, and, you know, even some parts of this have also been even on their own 1-hour workshops, but we will leave time for Q&A at the end. Next slide, please. So again, just some more statistics showing us, you know, how pressing the need is, how many individuals are living with caregivers 65 and older, and then mostly importantly, and this is important for practitioners to note, that families are asking themselves these questions of, you know, what will happen when I'm gone or no longer able to provide the care. And very few families have a full long-term plan, because we're spending so much time trying to navigate the system that we're currently in. So there certainly is a recognition of how great the need is. Next slide, please. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is we're going to run through some under 21, but also spend time on adults, which is really will be the bulk of it, since we spend our loved ones spend many more years post 21 than pre 21, and obviously it's where we really look at those pressing long-term service needs. So we have 2 different systems. Obviously, the under 21 covered by IDEA, which I imagine most of this audience is familiar with, and then over 21, which is in New Jersey within the Division of Developmental Disabilities. The funding streams are a little bit different, and the eligibility criteria differs, but generally someone with an autism diagnosis is, you know, not going to have an eligibility issue. Now, when we're talking about funding, we have to think about it in several different groupings, right? So I frequently will have groups that come to me, sometimes individual families, but now I'm seeing more and more families coming together as a group with an idea. Sometimes they'll even walk in with the architect plans already. They'll say, oh, this one's donating the land and this is what we're going to build. And when we stop and we say, that is important, obviously, and that is often part of our dream, you know, what's it going to look like, and sometimes the development and the planning of that can obviously have a direct and profound impact on the programming. We have to also, though, ask some more important questions, because the housing itself, getting the construction cost, that's the easy part. Even getting the cost of the rent becomes easier, and there is been, you know, an influx of funding and things such as housing vouchers and the like. The real focus has to be, though, on the budget for services, because that's where really the cost is. But most importantly, to ask that question of who is going to run this, right? And is this going to survive me? Now, in New Jersey, one of the really positive developments is that a number of years ago, we switched from a contract system. So in the old system, it used to be that if you were approved for residential, you had very few choices, and the rates were pretty much, centered in the middle. So everyone got around the same, no matter what their needs are. When we switched for fee for service, it no longer became that they just get sort of like a bulk, amount in order to serve this person as an adult. It's actually individualized by service. Now, for providers, many of them will say that was a nightmare because people didn't know how to bill or what to call things, and there were a lot of growing pains. But the end result was very good because it introduced a lot more choice, and it also gave families the ability to do some creative things. So we do have choices for both licensed setting, which will be maybe your more traditional group home, supervised apartment, and unlicensed settings, which could be a rental property or even in the family home where you do a self-directed model. So there are a lot of choices. Next slide, please. So I do want to talk a little bit about funding sources for children residential placement, because there's a lot of confusion here. We do, again, there, if somebody has significant needs and they're not making progress in just a school program, they may meet criteria for residential in all three settings. So our three possible funding sources are the school district, which a lot of families don't realize that. In fact, I have many cases where we'll go in and the school district will agree, yes, this child needs comprehensive care 24/7, and then they'll tell the parent, we'll go to Children's System of Care or Perform Care. While that is a resource, it's not your only resource, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the school district standard. Where families generally are asking that is when they're looking for a campus program and frequently have to go out of state. And New Jersey, we only currently have one out-of-state contract with an out-of-state provider. So families will sometimes find programs on their own in other states, and CSOC Perform Care is not a possibility. Now, it is a little bit of alphabet soup when we're talking about under 21. That was a change in 2013. There's a lot of things that I have complained about in government and have rallied to try to change or improve. This is one of the hottest area for me because it has been very difficult transition. I think the system is set up more for it's really a mental health model, and there's not enough prevention to provide intensive support so someone doesn't have to leave the family's home. And when they do go to a program, they tend to be more short-term placements. So it's a lot of anxiety for families. Another possible funding source is also health insurance. That tends to be more of an acute stabilization, short stays, although there are a few programs, not enough. But for instance, Kennedy Krieger has a neurobehavioral unit through Johns Hopkins. It's actually like a treatment team and school within a hospital. That one actually can be for an extended period of time. I've had students there for as long as a year, but that is obviously that's a different funding stream than school district or Perform Care. Next slide, please. And by the way, I do talk really, really fast. I learned that I started my career as a prosecutor in the Brooklyn DA's office, and the first judge I assigned to used to always tell me, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Miss McCauley, actually, back then. So I'm good at talking fast, but again, we'll have time for questions. Okay, so now on the school district issue, a lot of, as I said, districts will tell families that if you have that need, you should go to CSOC or Perform Care. Again, there's not as broad an array of choices. And some of the more renowned residential programs, for instance, in the behavioral field, like the May Institute, now even Children's Center in New York that have a very strong behavioral program, they're not going to be covered under that. So you may have to look to the school district. You could possibly meet criteria for all three systems. And so you could, if you show that in order to make meaningful progress, the student needs 24/7 care, a comprehensive program. So we frequently with behaviors, we might see where in order for the behavior intervention plan to be effective, you have to do it the same across all settings, and it's very hard to implement it in the home. And that you may require particularly a campus environment where there's real integration of both day and and the home component. Sometimes school districts will tell families, oh, we can't do that because it has to be in the least restrictive environment. That's correct, the least restrictive environment. However, that is appropriate. And for some students, appropriate does mean a residential placement. Next slide, please. So really the seminal case is the Third Circuit case, which is a federal circuit where the New Jersey's cases go to when they go on appeal, was in a 1981 case, the Krill case. And in that one, the district did argue this sort of classic argument that, oh no, it's too restrictive, or this is more in the nature of parenting than education. And the court rejected the school district's argument and held that in order to provide FAPE, that student did need the consistency of programming and the environment, which is critical to the student's ability to learn. So I hope that none of you are facing this, but I do want to let you know that it is a possible option, and it does open up many more options. One of the problems, though, is that if you get it solved that way, DDD no longer places. So you will have to still be thinking about what you're going to do in New Jersey for 21, unless you were to, move to that other state. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to talk about adult services. As I said, over 21 is now DDD. You can actually apply at 18, but you can't get services to 21. I recommend applying about a year before your 21st birthday, because just in case we have some bumps in the road, and particularly if you're looking for intensive or specialized services, it will give us more time to figure out what your budget's going to be. But applying at 18 is not particularly helpful because they sometimes will make you redo the assessment when it gets closer to graduation anyway. So even though they say you can apply at 18, usually we're looking more at like 19 and a half, even 20. Now, you have to, in order to get any type of services, when we moved to fee-for-service in New Jersey, the good news was that it did provide some flexibility. So again, in the old days, if you said, I need residential, it would be for you to jump that waiting list. They would say it's an emergency, and you literally had to take the next available. Now you can elect to use your budget in home services as well. And but the thing that's important to know about that is that New Jersey used to be state-only dollars. We're now a federal matching program, which is good because it gives us more dollars to the state. We were one of the last states to come to the table with that. But what's important to note is that you must be enrolled in Medicaid. So that's another planning tool that you need to be thinking about. Not having assets in the individual's name. No, you can't have more than $2,000. You can apply for that at 18. And we usually do that around the same time what we're doing the guardianship. We look at getting someone to get Medicaid and SSI. Now, one other point on that too is that sometimes families will say, well, we have private health insurance, I don't want the Medicaid. Now, you can maintain your private health insurance, and we recommend that you do that if that is an option, because it will give you more options with respect to medical care. My son had a very significant surgery, and thank God he had private insurance, because we were able to go to, literally a top retina surgery at Penn that we would not have been able to do if we had just been in a Medicaid program. So if you have that option, keep it. And then Medicaid becomes the secondary insurer for your health plan, but it is the source for all of your adult services, your job coach, your day program, your residence, your recreation. So post 21, Medicaid is going to be important. So you want to start thinking about that earlier and applying at 18. Now, for community-based programs, so not developmental centers or nursing homes, the waiver funding source, so that federal dollars that we're tapping in New Jersey, right, where we're getting those federal matching dollars, that comes through a program called the Home and Community-Based Services. So you're going to hear me talk about HCBS. That is really the big question about what is your state going to allow you to use your money on. Next slide, please. So yes, there is a waiting list, and it can be long. It can be up to 10 years, although sometimes it does move a little bit quickly because we'll have occasionally an initiative to take more people off the list. In order to get on the list, both parents have to be age 55 or over. And so when you're in the DDD system, as soon as the second parent turns 55, then you can get on the waiting list. But there are some circumstances where I'm actually going to take a minute and just turn a little light on here. I see that the sun is going down here on the left. So let me just do this. Okay. But in some circumstances, we can actually do what we call, jumping the list. And that's where a person is at risk of imminent harm or homelessness, or so you actually are bypassing the list. Now, homelessness, that we frequently see where the sibling may approach us. So the second parent has passed, they're not on the waiting list at all. Some cases, even they're not even in the DDD system, and the sibling comes and we're able to argue that this person will be homeless. We can jump the list. We've had situations too with single parents that have had a crisis, so maybe we meet that. But the most common reason for jumping that long waiting list is that it's a dangerous situation. So generally speaking, person has very significant support needs, particularly surrounding behaviors. Another thing that I want to mention too is that, which is so much confusion, is that name of that waiting list has changed. It's been the urgent, it's been the residential waiting list. They now call it the community care program waiting list. So it's not the priority. It's also not the general waiting list. We don't want to be on that general waiting list. I tell parents, if you're going to go on that general waiting list, just put your child's name on a Post-it and put it on the wall in McDonald's, because it's the same equivalent. You're not moving up the list. You must be on the community care program waiting list. So let's just stop for a minute and review some terms again and see why that makes sense. Because in the DDD system, when you're first entering the system as a graduate, when you're deemed eligible, you're going to get on this federal waiver, the supports program. That's the budget that will fund your day services, which could be a variety of things. It doesn't even have to be a traditional day program. It could be some individual supports. It could be a job coach, it could be a recreation program. That's the supports. The larger part of your budget is the community care program. So it's the comprehensive waiver, but that's CCP. That's the piece that you're getting on the waiting list for. So if you have an emergency or, a very severe situation, and it's also can be maybe a parent is ill and can no longer care, we recommend that you obviously seek some guidance on it and see whether or not you might be able to jump that list. But if not, then just when the second parent turns 55, get on that wait list. Then every year you will, once a year, used to be June, I think it's August now, they send out a note that will actually, in the letter, will tell you what number your loved one is. Next slide, please. Okay, so here, this is the $1 million question where I think there's the greatest confusion. And in New Jersey, we had so much confusion because our plan changed. So I just talked about that. You have these federal funds. The program's called the Community Care Program, right? So the CCP, we want to be in that community care program. The federal dollars that are funding that, those are the HCBS funds, the Home and Community-Based Supports funds. So this question came up, right? Which is, well, what can you use these funds for? And the reason why it became a very pressing question is that it's probably 8-9 years ago, as a result of the Affordable Care Act, CMS began to review how the states were using their home and community-based funds and said to the states, we want you to submit a plan and tell us how you're using your funds. You're going to give us something called the statewide transition plan. And when in that, you're going to tell us what you use your funds for, because you can't use these funds for institutional settings. That question of, well, what is an institutional setting? Because we knew developmental centers and nursing homes are clearly institutional settings. That's a different fund of money. But then it became the question of, well, what about a campus? What about a farmstead? What about a housing cluster? What about a cluster within a bigger complex? So the question really became, well, where are you allowed to live if you're developmentally disabled or have autism? And I phrase it that way intentionally because we did have, when we were in the early days of the New Jersey fight, have some policymakers tell us, well, you are allowed to live anywhere. And we would have to say, yes, but if you won't give us the money, you're essentially saying we're not allowed to live there. So that, in essence, is the question. So how do we answer this question of where are you allowed to live? Next slide, please. Oh, so now I'm actually just taking a pause because I've been using a lot of terminology for you, obviously. These many you'll be familiar with, but again, just reviewing children's system of care, perform care is one that will come up. And by the way, in addition to providing for residential, they also do provide for some in-home services. It has been frustrating for families. The process is challenging. I frequently will go to a school district if someone needs more home supports before we look at perform care. And with during COVID, it got even worse because they pay a very low rate. So those providers are hard to find. And also just understand what perform care is. Children's System of Care is the government entity, and they actually pay perform care as an outside entity to administer the program. So sort of think of them almost like they're the insurance company. They're the ones that are going to look at your case and decide in the same way an insurance company may say, oh, you need the MRI or you're okay to the physical therapy. Perform care is the ones that's deciding, yes, this family should get some in-home services or should get residential. Again, obviously DDD for adult services, and that important concept of if you're looking for that larger budget, you're looking for the CCP, the community care program, not just the supports program budget. That will be in addition to the CCP budget. And then again, once we're back again to this discussion of this HCBS, those federal dollars, what can we use it for? Because we want to use it to pay for the program where they're living, to provide for the individuals supporting them and all the other services that come along, such as behavioral services. And of course, STP. So next slide, please. I hope that pause was helpful. Okay, so what's an STP? As I said, it stands for the statewide transition plan. It happened as a result of this. And they did just extend implementation. So now it's again 2022. And in fact, New Jersey is just about to submit their latest and last version. But what happened is that the question of, well, what will they allow us? The settings rule itself, so the federal law that looked at what you can use your dollars for, like in what setting? So say, for instance, just look at an example, I'd like my child to live in a farmstead community, okay? What happened is that the rule itself was not bad. It basically just talked about that individuals had to have choice and access to the community. But after a couple of years after it was passed, there was guidance issued where CMS answered questions. And one of the questions that was asked was, well, will you allow the funding to be used in farmsteads? And CMS didn't say no, but they gave this sort of mishmash, fuzzy answer about, well, farmsteads can be a problem because people may not leave and they may be very far and there's not really access to the community. It was really a very inaccurate portrayal. And also in New Jersey, we don't have 300-acre farmsteads that people are living on. So what happened was there was a lot of confusion. And so a lot of the states were thinking that, well, it's not so clear. So let's just be real cautious and say all we're going to do is group homes. Next slide, please. So answering that question of, well, where should we be allowed to live? Here's just some organizations that have answered this, and these are really good resources for you. So National Council on Severe Autism answered it, which housing policies on all levels, federal, state, and local, should aim to remove barriers and unleash new options and capacity. To this end, we call for a system that incentivizes and supports a full continuum of residential options. So essentially they say, make the rules that everybody can have choice. They can have as many options as non-disabled people can have. I think A Place in the World, which by the way, just issued a fabulous report that not only helps with terminology and funding sources, but it also, they do a lot of profiles of programs across the country. So I really would urge you to take a look at that. I think the way they said it as well too is that just as housing and supports for seniors have diversified and expanded over the past 50 years, individuals with autism and other IDDs should be also allowed to access a variety of choices to meet their board spectrum of support needs and diverse lifestyle preferences. So again, choice, variety of options, lots of options, let people make their individual choice, let them pick things that really meet their needs. And then, of course, the one that I loved the best was an adult testifying in New Jersey's public comment session when we had our first STP, which was horrible. This gentleman just stood up and said, "I'd like to live on a farm with my friends." So it seems very clear. So one would think that we could answer that question, which is, where you're allowed to live, that the answer should be that if you have a disability, you should be able to live where you want to live and not limit the options. Next slide, please. So again, as I said, the settings rule itself was actually not bad. It was very outcome oriented. It didn't say anything about physical location. It didn't say about the size or density. So that was one thing that came up, and it's still, a lot of states are still doing this, which is really terrible, is that they would actually set density requirements. So say, for instance, someone was going to build a housing complex, then and it could even be in a totally affordable housing complex, they would say, no more than 25% of people can be coming in with their DDD, their federal home and community-based funds. And now, why did that happen, right? Because this pendulum just swung all the way over here. So there was a time where the only option was, very early in life, parents would be told, your child is not going to be capable of living in the community, they should go live in a developmental center. And I do want to say too, that this is not to be critical of the developmental center. It just was problematic when that was the only choice. But we do have lots of families that have fought very hard to keep that as an option and are happy with that option. But then what happened in New Jersey, we had a lot of them. It was, per capita, we were one of the states with the greatest number of spots in developmental centers. But then it swung all the way to the other thing, which is like, no, everybody has to be in the community, and those community settings have to be integrated. So we don't want clusters, we don't want farmsteads. We want to even limit the number of people that could be in a housing complex. When that rule first came out in New Jersey, our response back to it was, what other population would we be comfortable saying that, oh, there's 100 units. Oh, you're number 26. You have a disability. You can't come here, right? Or if we said you can't come because you're a woman or you're Jewish or African American, we would be appalled. But we were allowing, not only allowing that discrimination, but actually mandating it. One point, federal rule does allow states to be more restrictive. So advocacy at the federal level was very important, but so is at the state level. And thankfully, New Jersey does have a very strong advocacy community. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where I think a lot of the confusion came out, okay? Because essentially the Fed said, okay, here's this money, states, tell us how you're going to use it, and don't use this pot of money, which is almost everybody, because very few people are living in nursing homes or in developmental centers. Less people, more people are using the HCBS funds, which are used on traditional things like group homes or supervised apartments, but people wanted to begin to use it on other things, in other models. What the Fed said was that, well, some things you can go ahead and build, states, but you're going to have to go through the second step of a heightened scrutiny review. So if it is, for instance, if it's on the grounds of a public institution, you'll have to go through heightened scrutiny. It was this third element where they said any setting that has the effect of isolating individuals from the broader community, they'll have to go through heightened scrutiny. And that's where everybody panicked, because everyone thought, well, what does that mean? So to be safe, let's just build 4-person group homes and they're not going to bother us. Let's not build these other things. Okay, next slide, please. When this rule came out, then states began to develop their STPs, and New Jersey's was horrific. In fact, I remember I was in Chicago at a conference, and we had representatives from all the states, and the speaker was saying, now let's talk about, this was in the early days when people were just learning, like, what is this HCBS? What is an STP? What is my state doing? What are the feds saying yes, no to? And the speaker looked around the room and said, we're going to hear from each state. Oh, I see Lisa Parles is here. Why don't you go first, since New Jersey has the worst plan in the country? So it was disheartening because they had no more than 4 beds in a group home and 6 only in circumstances. This 25% density limit was terrible. Outright ban on campuses, intentional communities, farmsteads, even clusters. And at that point in time, right before the SDP, a number of developers like Penn Rose is one of them, Bergen County United Way is another. They were successfully beginning to build some of these intentional communities. Some of them would be small and located right down in town. In fact, United Way's very first one was in Allendale. It was only 16, maybe 18, units. You could literally step out your door and walk to stores and the like. They all came to a halt because this had all these density limits. So the good news is that we fought this. And I will say, looking back on it and looking at what's happened in other states, I think the reason why we ended up with a good SDP is because they went so extreme that it woke everybody up. And this was not just the autism community. We heard a lot from, full spectrum, even again, this young man who was capable of speaking for himself. I know no one uses Asperger's anymore, but on that end of the spectrum that said, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to do it. And also the medically fragile community came in as well, because the 75% of the day out in the community for day programs was ridiculous. People were saying, what are we going to do? Like walk around the mall and someone needs to be changed. We're going to change it in the food court. It was so extreme that it just energized the advocacy. And ultimately we were successful. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all this, but just to show you, there were a lot of different plans. And ultimately in 2016, we got the current version. And now we have the latest one that's actually addressing farmsteads specifically to make it clear that we can do farm communities in New Jersey. The only caveat will be that a provider can't make a person choose only that model. So if you were to live on a farm, you were working in the farm, but then you decided, hey, I want to spend part of my day, working in a paid job elsewhere. Dee Dee's current position is that the provider's not going to be able to say, no, you're not allowed to do that, which is, I think, is good. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so in our current situation, our good SDP, there's no longer a density review process, so they're not going to say. In fact, it got so bad in New Jersey that they were actually, even if you wanted to build a group home, they were doing a radius clause and saying like, oh no, there's another group home within a mile, you can't buy that house. We were just on the verge of bringing litigation on that. It was particularly troubling in towns where the train station wasn't really important to either getting staff there or letting people access work. And you tell me like one group home moves in walking distance and then we're all out of the mix. So thankfully that was replaced by now a community integration review, and that can be done before the actual project as well. So, which is good because for one point it was going to be, it had to be operational. Well, how many people were going to build things and say, well, we'll just run this for a little bit and then come in and look? Particularly for people with autism, and absolutely for people with high needs, families can't just float that. This can be hundreds of thousands of dollars that it would take. So now they do allow for an array of choices, and you can go into DDD with a proposal and get your preliminary review. Obviously, when you're running, you're going to have to show that you're letting people have access to the community and make choices. But it certainly, it has opened up development again. Next slide, please. Okay, so we asked for and we got new guidance issued that clarified that there's nothing in the federal law that says that, that they're presumed, and that they don't prohibit you from using your funds in congruent settings, farmsteads, gated community, and disability specific. That was actually in a letter from the CMS administrator. We now have new leadership in Washington, and there are many. And at the end, I have a slide that will tell you what organizations that you can be in touch with that can, they're very active now to making sure that this does continue to be the policy. And we're optimistic that it will be. Next slide, please. Okay, so I liked, we got to go back to Benjamin's Hope. Okay, thank you. So Benjamin's Hope was my inspiration. At one point, the source of terrible aggravation, and now the source of joy. And what Benjamin's Hope is a 40-acre farm in Michigan that was actually built, funded, created by a New Jersey family. And in the early days of the SDP, I was losing my mind because not only that this wonderful program was out there in Michigan, and the New Jersey family had told me like they were very concerned about the New Jersey circumstances. They moved for family reasons, but I really did think like they went elsewhere, and how many other people are going to be leaving because New Jersey has these restrictive rules. And they actually, I think it was the original development was a $17 million development. They did that all on philanthropic dollars. They did not ask for the federal building fund. So we used this as an example when we went to Washington and were meeting with all members of Congress and then ultimately CMS to say that, look at this, these public-private partnerships are great. Like this, a lot of individuals want this and thrive in these type of settings. And why would you not encourage it, particularly when you're going to get a partner that might build something that you're not even having to give the building dollars. So as I said, the good news is now we can build this in New Jersey. And also the really good news is that Benjamin's Hope now also receives HCBS funds. So not only did they get built, but they were also approved and they're getting the Medicaid funds. Next slide, please. In terms of where we are in New Jersey, we've got a good STP. We've got, the ability to build a variety of models, but we also have something that happened, which was wonderful, is that we have some funding available within a number of the towns, because what happened in New Jersey is that when a developer went to build, they were supposed to do set-asides for affordable units, but if they didn't, they could pay. It was almost like a fine system. They could just pay into a municipal housing trust fund. And what happened was that under the Christie administration, they just never dispersed the funds. And in fact, the COA group actually wasn't even meeting at that point. So the money just kept piling up. And then what ultimately happened is that Fair Share Housing, which is a not-for-profit law firm, went and actually started to bring lawsuits and forced it that, well, if you're not going to meet, then this court's just going to start ordering it. Since then, towns are aware of this. And now we have that towns are actually putting dollars towards the development of affordable housing. And our loved ones do qualify generally for affordable housing. So we are seeing a lot of movement, a lot of towns that, and I do have to give kudos to Bergen County United Way. They were really one of the first ones to do it in towns that typically were not offering affordable housing. They, they were first in Allendale, and now they're in many different places, Wyckoff, and I know they have a project in Colts Neck that they're looking at. So it was the rule change, but also these dollars became available. That's for the building dollars, which is important also. Next slide, please. So these are some of the organizations that you can go to for information. So this first one, the New Jersey Citizens for Choice and DD Housing and Services, I'm happy to say that originally that group was called Say No to the NJSCP. So that happened after we had the first round of hearings, and we literally went back to our law office and we all said this is insane. We can't let them say we can't have these things. And we have thousands of members on it. And then when we got the good STP, we said, let's keep this network going. So you can like this group, join this group on Facebook. And we post a lot of information there on new projects, articles that come up across the nation. And I've also seen in the comments section, families actually connecting in it, oh, I like this idea. Is anyone else interested? So that's one. The other two, Coalition for Community Choice and Together for Choice, they have to be given credit on a national level. They were early to the advocacy stage in terms of saying, we have to allow for choice, and also being there as a wonderful resource to educate people when we were first learning, well, what does that federal rule allow? Together for Choice in particular has a wonderful housing piece on their website where you can actually look up other programs, existing programs and programs in development. And then in terms of just overall advocacy, and a group that is very much involved in making sure that the feds do continue to allow a variety of choices, National Council of Severe Autism. So those are some resources. Next slide. Okay, so this is one organization. I'm actually on the board of this organization. It's Circle Haven. I invite you to go on their website. There's actually a couple different videos, but there's one 12-minute video that talks a little bit about, you know, the key components of the program. It does have a farming component in terms of, you know, growing food, not animals. So I know sometimes people think farms. One of the families that's very much involved are the owners of Bobbling Farms. I don't know if any of you are cheese fans, but it's a very renowned cheesemaker in New Jersey. I think actually Anthony Bourdain has did a section, you know, a segment on them once. So it does have a, you know, an element where things will be grown, and then obviously then the participants will learn how to, you know, make meals from what they've grown. So, you know, farm to table essentially. And it is a cluster. It's going to be in South Jersey, and they did get approval from DDD. So there is evidence that this is happening, and it is happening more over the last couple of years, I would say, particularly over the last, I'd say 2 years. We did, you know, everything did slow, obviously, with COVID. You know, towns weren't holding meetings as frequently. Building costs have gone up. Hopefully that's changing because of the supply chain. Lumber also went up because everyone was renovating their home during COVID. But it's just an example of something that is in development and exciting. And I do want to sort of end with the point that there is, you know, there's energy, there's funds, there's hope. And I think that we are going to, you know, the landscape is going to look very different in a number of years. But I think that it is important for people to be talking about, you know, thinking about it now, looking at other programs, to be getting ideas. And one place that we often see where families come together is often, you know, at the school in the, you know, during their school years. I'm seeing families come in to see us with kids as young as 12 or 13 that are starting to think about it. So I think that leaves us with a little bit more than a half hour for questions. So I think I'm going to make one more point and then stop. One thing that I didn't mention is that how you get your budget. So our supports program, everyone's going to get, that's your day program budget. If you your number comes up on the list, or you successfully jump the list, then you're going to get that bigger CCP budget. The range is tremendous. That was a big change when we went to fee for service. So as I said, everyone used to get about an average, say about 200,000. Now you can get anywhere from just 38,000 all the way up to, you know, over 400,000. And the way your budget is set is through this NJCAT, which is really important. It's an assessment tool. I urge you, do not do that without preparation. Get it beforehand. Get some advice on it. I know in Northern New Jersey, the Cape Center offers families assistance with it so they can go over with it. Every question could be another point, which can bump you from an A tier to a C tier, to whether it gives you the acuity rating or not. So again, look at that, 38,000 up to 430,000. The stakes are very, very high. So that is just a critical component that you will do, you know, about a year to 6 months before you actually graduate and leave the educational entitlement. Okay, with that, I am definitely going to stop talking and turn it back to the moderator to see if we can have a little bit of an exchange here.
Well, I didn't see anybody put anything in the chat, but feel free to do that or answer any questions. And thank you so much, Lisa. This was very informative. I love the idea of the Circle Haven and you know, Benjamin's Hope as well.
It does look like there's two comments in the chat. I'm not sure.
One said good evening, and the other, thanks so much for joining
us.
Oh,
okay.
Nothing in terms of a question.
Okay. Well, no one has a specific question because it was obviously a lot of information. Maybe I just back up a little bit again to review some of the key points, which is that, so for your to-do list, that you want to make sure that your loved one is Medicaid eligible, because you're not going to access those adult services dollars, even your day program dollars, without being Medicaid eligible, and you can't have more than $2,000 in your name. So you have to make sure that you're not putting money in the name. Grandma and grandpa are not leaving money. If there is funds, you can protect it in a special needs trust. So that's another thing from planning that you have to think about. So before the 18th birthday, start thinking about that, because at 18, you're going to want to apply for both Social Security, which is the monthly check that you get, right? But more importantly, it's Medicaid, and it's not just that that isn't a medical insurance and possibly your secondary insurance, that's your federal matching dollars for adult services. So that's sort of like step one to be thinking about. I think someone did post something about the NJ-CAT, but it flashed quickly.
Yes, they wanted more information on the New Jersey CAT, and then if you could elaborate on that, I think was the question.
Okay, so it stands for New Jersey Comprehensive Assessment Tool. It's, I'm gonna guess, and I actually did one today with someone, and it's pages and pages, so it's probably 60, 70 questions. And you can, so clearly it's in sections on functioning level in terms of like self-help skills, behavior, medical, and I don't like this tool, and I'll tell you why. We used to use a variety of tools in New Jersey, but the old tool used to allow you for more of a scale. So if you asked a question like, does the person make eye contact? The old tools would say like sometimes, often, usually, never. A lot of these questions are yes, no. And I was actually literally with one of the very first families that did the very first NJ-CAT. At the time, it was actually online, so you weren't talking to a real person. And we got that question, and mom said yes, and dad said no. And at that time, you'd actually call a helpline. So we would call, it's a Rutgers helpline, and we called, and this is what I said to them. You're not giving me a scale. And by the way, back then, they wouldn't let you see it beforehand. And you only, like, once you opened it, you had to do it. It was just horrible. So again, good advocacy. Autism New Jersey played a big role in this to say, no, we gotta let parents get it beforehand. You should be able to print it out. If you want to do it with a person, now they actually do it with a person. So that you can get it through it's actually on DDD's website. And you know, since it's a yes, no, what I said to the help desk at that point, look, you're not giving me a scale. So this is how I'm treating it. If this individual does not do this all the time in the same manner as a typically developing person of the same age, and a prompt is even a reminder, I'm saying no. And they said, okay. Okay, so they weren't fighting us on it, but families didn't know that. And in the early years, we were getting so many people that just, you know, the scores made no sense, people that needed it. And I also will tell you something, I find this particularly in the autism community, and particularly for individuals that are in good ABA programs, because their loved ones did gain skills. So you would ask them, you know, does your loved one shower? And there is a little bit of skills, like independent, verbal prompts, physical assistance, or no opportunity to do it all because you haven't taught the skill yet. I was having a lot of families that would say, oh yeah, they shower. And I'd say, well, hold on a second, okay? Tell me, well, it used to be that couldn't shower at all. He would run out of the shower. He would squeeze all the shampoo out of the thing. Like now he's going in and showering. I said, yeah, but don't you have a picture schedule hanging up? Or don't you check the water temperature before? Oh yeah, I do that. Well, that's not independent. Independent is you dropped them off at Rutgers and you came back in parent weekend and they did it all, okay? You went across the street and watched Real Housewives and then you came back, they showered thoroughly, dried themselves and didn't stand in the shower for 45 minutes. The college example is not a good one because lots of families will tell me, hey, my typical kid, when I went down for Parents Week and hadn't showered, but you get the idea, the point that I'm trying to make. So one resource is the Cape Center in Bergen County. They do periodically do seminars on it, and they will also offer individual assistance as well. So I would check out their website as well. Those services are free, but you want to get it beforehand, sit down and take your time with it, and make sure that you're talking to the providers, the schools that are in your child's life. And also too, one mistake that I see is that I've had families that have said, well, I didn't want to say my child was that bad because then no one would take him. And I have to tell them, but if your child has those needs and you don't get a budget that's going to cover those needs, no one's going to take them. So, answer it honestly. And when it's a close call, we're going to not say independent, because it really does affect, you're talking literally millions of dollars over someone's lifetime.
Another question, that was a very good answer on the NJCAT, absolutely. Does the special needs trust need to be under $2,000?
No. So the $2,000 is the money that actually belongs to the person with special needs, right? So they have a bank account, or maybe they have an investment account, or even a bond that you bought for them at birth. Their actual assets that are in their name can't be more than $2,000. So you want to avoid putting things directly in their name, but there are two avenues where they can have some assets, but they're held in different ways. One is an ABLE account. So you can, and I think it's now $15,000, you can open at a bank something which is an account specifically for people with disabilities. You can put up to $15,000 a year. It does not count against you for Medicaid eligibility. And then the second avenue is that you have to, see a knowledgeable trust and estates attorney that knows this area. Don't go to a pediatrician for brain surgery. So don't go to your real estate lawyer for a special needs trust. You want to make sure, and don't assume that every trust and estates attorney knows this as well too. So what they do is essentially is that if there's already assets in the child's name, and frequently around 18 when we're doing guardianship and we have to report that to the court, to the guardianship, we have discovered people that have things in their name. We can, through a court process, get permission to move it into a trust. But so it can be corrected, but if nothing has been, put in the child's name yet, but eventually it will go there, right? So again, families will sometimes say like, well, we won't really have much. And we say $2,000, like if something happens to the two of you, your life insurance policy, or if you got in a car accident, it could be a personal injury suit, or just the equity in your house. If you don't have a will, that goes directly to the child. And if you have just a typical will, that it doesn't go to the trust in the child's name and goes directly to the child, it's going to knock you off of eligibility. And we've had that happen where people are like in a group home funded and they get knocked off, and it's a mess to clean up. So the $2,000 is directly in your name, like their bank account. There's no limit on what you can put in a special needs trust. You just have to make sure it's drawn properly and carefully.
Excellent. Next question. Do you have any general advice for those who have a residential placement through CSOC, but are approaching age 21 and need to find a new placement through DDD?
Okay, so I've already said my least favorite system, and it takes a lot. And I can't tell you how many task force meetings I've sat there and said, I never thought I would utter these words, but I prefer DDD. Okay. Children's system of care has a lot of problems with it. And one of them is right now is that if you're residentially placed and when you turn 21, even if you're in the middle of your school year, they will tell you, you have to leave this placement. Okay. We have fought that. Unfortunately, it's very inconsistent, but we have sometimes been able to say, No, let's let them not lose their school placement, because they may have, then they're what, gonna leave the school and go to adult services sooner, which you don't want to do, or be too far from the school because you're going to take an adult group home. We have successfully gotten permission to leave the person in the children's system of care home to finish their school year, and DDD actually pays for it, so it takes a little coordination. So that's the first thing I just want to make sure. If someone's telling you like you got to get out by 21, don't take that as an answer. And since COVID, I've seen they're more flexible, because quite frankly, the adult services placements, the growth did slow through COVID. Like I had a number of people that were graduating that we had already selected an adult provider, and the adult provider is just not going to be ready come June, because they're just, again, the inspector couldn't get there, or, the lumber price went up and things got slowed. And I have seen a lot of flexibility where DDD is letting them stay and they're paying for it. In terms of advice on how to look for a provider, so here's the thing, okay, is that one of the problems I frequently see, and we were chatting about this, a little bit before when the webinar started, is that you have to either create a culture, perhaps, and there are many families that are starting from scratch, and a lot of programs that are just growing out of schools that are now going into adult services, or even adult providers that only did day that are looking at residential. And I've even had some families that have approached programs that haven't done residential, and they're going to them to say, let's start the program. I think a successful program, one thing that is really critical is you want to make sure that there is a lot of parent involvement, and not just in fundraising, though fundraising is very important. And in adult services, the dollars do drop, particularly in day. So even the highest level, some of the private schools are 100,000, 120, 140, right? Plus transportation. Even in the highest level, it's only 65,000 for a day program. So if you want quality adult services, you have to be prepared to work and support the program. So we've had families that have wanting to improve programs, are either looking at starting programs or approaching existing programs and saying, hey, we want to do a special project, or the like. So there's a shortage of quality providers, there's no doubt, but I don't think it's healthy for it to be an us versus them dynamic, and that always troubles me. One of my son's first placements was at a school called Alpine Learning Group, and why I thought that was always such a wonderful program, and why we successfully did build an adult day program and center, was because everyone felt that this is our problem, it's not the provider or the school's problem to solve. So we all have a lot in our lives. Obviously, some of us sometimes, and there's been periods in my son's life where like the goal was to shower that day. So I understand that it's a lot to say, like, go create your own program. But I do want to tell you that there are seeds of it, and there are in the mix. And also families have gone to existing programs, particularly in the autism area, where they've said, like, we need to make sure that these behavioral services are going to continue. Like, what if we worked with you on a special project to make sure that these X number of homes did have assigned behavior analyst, and we're going to help you, figure that out. And we are seeing initiatives. In fact, DDD just did a RFP, a request for proposals, for group homes that serve individuals with behavioral acuity, and they're offering additional dollars for the building of that project. So, at the over 21, I think that we are seeing a recognition that this is still an underserved population.
Next question is, what if you want to keep your child home? Is the funding for that?
I'm really glad somebody asked that question, because I meant to talk about it and I didn't adequately address it. So again, another really good change in New Jersey. So in the old days, it used to be that if you needed residential, either your name came up on the list or you declared emergency, which a lot of people, that's how they get it, because the circumstances warrant the child needing to be placed before their name came up, that they would say, well, this is an emergency, you have to go to this licensed group home, we don't care how far away it is, because, oh, by the way, it's an emergency, so don't say no. That's not the case anymore. If your number comes up, or if you have extensive needs, you can argue to jump the list and get in CCP. And you can elect to keep your child in your home and through individual supports, have support staff come into your home. In addition to that, you can also do rental properties. And this, we've seen tremendous growth of this. And this year in particular, we had a lot of families do it because there were no visitation rules in licensed group homes. So a lot of families just knew that their loved one couldn't survive it. That was my own circumstance too. Even though I'm working on this community with Circle Haven, it's not built yet. And though we were, very happy with his circumstances, I knew there's no way that my son could not see me. And also he had a volunteer job at a food bank and a greenhouse that provided fresh produce for low-income seniors. And he'd been there for 6 years. And a lot of the group homes said, you can't essentially go to day program. And we did not want to lose that opportunity. So we had to do where we rented the house and we're doing self-directed. You can do, there's a couple different models with that. You can either get an agency that provides the staff, and one of them in particular, a lot of families have used is Easter seals, and there's more and more of them coming. However, they do take a big part of your budget. I mean, rightly so, to administrate it. Another option is something called PPL, which is public partnerships. And that's where you actually, the employer of record, PPL is just the administrator. So they cut the paychecks, they pay the workers' comp, they do the taxes and the like, but you hire, fire, and do the schedule. It is tremendous amount of work. But a lot of families like it because if someone's not gelling with their kid, now the problem is if you let someone go, it means you may have to be covering those hours. So there's plus and minus to all of it. It's been a wonderful thing. My son has gone from 2 days a week at the food bank to now 5 days a week. And, we really have a team that, works really well with him. But it is problematic from a long-term solution because if something happens to my husband and I, then the program is not running. So the answer is yes, you do not have to go into a traditional group home. You can keep the child in your home and get those CCP dollars. And you can either through PPL, hire and select the people in yourself, but there is work associated with that, or go to an agency. Another thing, which is a new position that was created in adult services, is something called a support broker. So you probably have all heard about support coordinators, which let me address that. So it used to be that you had a DDD case manager. When we went to fee for service, they eliminated DDD case managers. They created the support coordination system. Very mixed, okay? I mean, it's an unevenness. If you're having a problem with your support coordinator, ask to talk to a supervisor and get a more experienced one. You can ask for that. And if you're not satisfied, you can also ask for a change of support coordination agency. For no reason whatsoever, you're allowed to do that. But in addition to the support coordinator that helps write your plan and helps you find services, a support broker can do even more than that. And the good ones, there's one called Eros Group. Jennifer Brown is the head of that. She's my son's support broker. She actually will help you recruit the staff, run the ads, even screen staff for you. It does come out of your budget, but I think it's well worth it. So there are ways. We've also had some families that are doing self-directed that have got together and, they're near each other. So they may do something, again, pre-COVID, more of this was happening, but, we're going to do music day at my house. So you guys all come here. And next week, we're going to do a cooking, exercise over in your house. It gave people more options. So the answer is you don't have to only take a licensed group home. There are lots of options. It is complicated. And within it, it could be, do I do agency control? Do I do self-directed? Within self-directed, do I do PPL? It can be a little bit overwhelming, but support brokers are a great resource for that. And I particularly recommend this group, Eros Group, EIROS.
Excellent. And the last one, am I able to provide the future housing for my child as an adult and have services in that home? How would you recommend structuring that?
Okay, so this is obviously another good change, because it used to be, no, you only had to go through a licensed provider. And we even had bad circumstances where families bought the home and then gave it to the provider. So we had to make sure that, well, what would happen if you were no longer happy with the provider, or in one horrible circumstance where the provider didn't honor that and the person was moved out of that house. So if you're doing that with a provider, there's things we want to think about beforehand that's going to guarantee that your loved one is going to stay in that home. But if you don't want to go through a licensed provider, then there's a couple different options. So you can, the one downside, that if it's a family owned property, as opposed to if it goes to a not-for-profit, or even if you with other families create just an LLC, doesn't even have to be a not-for-profit, but it's a corporation, is that if the family owns the property, though, even if you do a lease and charge rent, you can't get a housing voucher. So that's one downside to it. Some families have still done it, and they've, one of them owned the home and then they shared it. It's called a shared housing model. Other families came in and those families were able to get, not that the housing voucher is a lot of money, it's, maybe $1,000 a month, but it does help. The housing voucher is also a new development. So if you get a housing voucher, which are pretty readily available in New Jersey now through DDD, you would essentially, you take 30% of your monthly assets, income. So if you have a job, but even if you don't, 30% of your Social Security check. And then the housing voucher, the Supportive Housing Association, actually pays the rest of your rent. So that's the one downside if you just buy a house and you just, say, my child's going to live there, is that if it's a family member that owns it, you can't get the housing voucher. So there are ways to do it. You may need a little bit more technical advice in terms of doing, but the answer is yes. There's just so many different options that are now allowable.
Excellent. I think the last question was, I wanted to know if they could get a copy of your presentation.
Absolutely. I mean, you're more than happy. Just, those slides you can share with anyone or anyone that you would like. And I believe this is being recorded, so I don't know if perhaps it will be on Yale's, website as well, in case you want to take a second look at it, because it was a lot of information, but yes. Mm-hmm. And also too, that, if you, like the firm's Facebook page too, we always post on there when we're having new seminars, and we're doing them all the time. And they might be on a more, digging more into the weeds. So not just talking about the overall picture, but like, we're going to literally talk about self-direction. In fact, I am doing one in a couple months from now with Jen Brown on how a support broker can help you do one of these more self-directed type programs.
Excellent. I think that was the ending for questions.
Okay, well, how about Yale? You guys must have some questions.
Yeah, I'm just so curious as to just the process, and maybe I don't even know if you'd have time to go through it. Like I love the idea of the farm and all of that. How did you get started, or and all that? And I'm assuming as well that there's structure to the day as well, almost like they work the farm there, and you said it goes farm to table, so that's like becomes part of their vocation with their
right. Well, this particular model, since it's mixed functioning level and mixed disabilities, it won't be a requirement that you work on the campus. In fact, the majority of people will probably go elsewhere, because we're actually right near Rowan University, so and a very vibrant, thriving downtown. So we anticipate some people will go and work in competitive employment, or may go to a different day program, but that option of being there. I think why that component's also important, not just in terms of what you're doing during your day hours, but the one thing that you'll learn when your child goes into residential is that there's a lot more hours beyond that day program hour. What are you doing in the afternoons? What are you doing on holidays? What are you doing from Friday to Monday? So having more, activities available on site are really important. And there are a few of other models. So for instance, United Way just opened one up in Florham Park. It's a pretty big project, and it's over 100 units, and it's all different mix. So it's like some people that have no services, they're just getting the affordable rent. Other people, it's actually a license where there's 24/7. It's like just a whole variety, but they have a community center. So they will have things going on. Again, now, sort of interesting too, because when COVID first hit, some of these national coalitions that I was on in the early calls, some people were saying, oh my God, it's going to be terrible. Like people are going to come after us and say, you know, this is why these congregate settings are bad. But the truth is, I know so many of the campus programs that did so well during COVID. People in group homes and in their homes have died. I mean, we've had over 200 people in the DDD system pass away from COVID. So the really good center-based programs, campus-based programs, they were just really did a great job at it. And the thing is that people's lives didn't completely close down. So now they had to develop new protocols now, and some of the programs I'm familiar with in other states, because they serve severely medically fragile, there's one program in Chicago, Misericordia, which is like just this fabulous program. And they did great during COVID. They had already had really stringent protocols because a lot of the population is severely medically fragile. So they already had protocols that you didn't come to work if you were sick, if you had a temperature, how they clean their surfaces, how after one group went into the pool, cleaning happened before the next group went in. So it ended up, ironically, is that this anti-campus where it was like, oh, you're going to have these isolated lives where, you have no choice. A lot of the people that lived on campuses had more full and complete lives through COVID. And I do want to actually talk a little bit about the one point, which I think is really important to remember, okay, is that because this happened when we started to meet with members of Congress, because we weren't getting anywhere with CMS, and we needed CMS, even though they were saying in a variety of settings, like, oh, we're not saying you can't have that. And we would say, well, you need to say that in writing, because some of the states are saying, well, we don't think that's the case, or it's consistent, or we're afraid we're going to build things and it's not going to get funded. We would meet with members of Congress, and when we would say, not only should people have choice, but for some people, like particularly high need populations, either medically fragile or behavioral, that cluster, just a small cluster. There's one person who's very active on a national level, was Joanne Gerenzer from Eden 2, who runs a program in Staten Island and the Genesis School out on Long Island. She was able to even come in and say, I can have 1.5 behavior analysts if you just let me put things closer, because they're stuck in traffic in Staten Island, and that the supervision is better because we're walking through the campus before someone leaves for the day. So when we would make those arguments and say, how about, like, maybe you might have a little more freedom because you might be able to teach someone to walk across the campus and get something, right? Sometimes the legislators' response back would be like, well, that's crazy. Why would anyone not want to let you have that option? So let me explain a little bit about why some people argued that, okay? Some people argued it because they did see the extreme. They did see those horrible stories, decades ago, Willowbrook, where people lived in these horrible situations where no one ever went into the community, and the community could be a check. Maybe it's the person who cuts your hair, or you see for pizza is going to notice a bruise, so totally segregated where you never see anyone that's running that project. It can be dangerous, right? But our counter back to that was, but so can group homes. People have horrible things happen to them in group homes, in supervised apartments. People have horrible things happen to them with a job coach when it's only them and the job coach. That's not the setting. Big isn't always bad and small isn't always good. And the opposite is true also. It's all about, where are your clinicians' role? What are your checks and balances? What kind of, things do you have in place that are going to look at quality, you're going to look at outcome? And that was one of the things we said too. When you're measuring quality, don't ask a stupid question like, does the person have a key to the door? Okay. For some people that's important, but for my son, no way am I giving him a key to the door. We don't even want to teach him that skill, right? I want him to know he's going to ask me if he's going outside, which thank God we taught that in Alpine, and it still does it to this day. Why don't we look at other things like, has the person's behaviors reduced? Okay, have they gone to the hospital? Are they learning new skills? There's ways we can, through a database program, look at quality indicators that don't have to do with whether or not you're spending time with disabled people or not for part of your day. Because, what's more meaningful? A meaningful activity that has, good outcomes, or a forced visit to the mall, which is fake anyway, because you're going with staff and you're not really interacting with anyone. And maybe someone doesn't like the mall. It's loud and it's noisy and they don't do well there. So I think what happened is that there were some people that bad experiences dictated another solution. And then honestly, there are some inclusion ideologues, and I'm going to make some enemies here, and I have enemies because of it. And that's just fine, because sometimes I count my enemies as a mark of my success, is that there are inclusion ideologues out there that just think that if you're around non-disabled people, it's better. I find that so offensive. Like, why is my son's, because he's in a volunteer experience with another disabled person, why is that of lesser value than the person that's working in paid employment? There are normative judgments being made that aren't based on choice and database measurable important outcomes. So that's why I think it happened, was that bad experiences, but I think that there are some ideologues, and we fight it every single year in a bunch of different formats. And one of the ones where you see it, there are some people that think Yale should not exist, that Alpine Learning Group should not exist, that Douglas should not exist, that Peter Gerhardt's program shouldn't exist. It's bad because you're in a segregated environment. And our response to that is, it's a specialized environment. It's not a segregated environment.
Exactly.
So you just, when we just jump to conclusions and label and say no, that is the greatest harm that we can do. And it limits choice. And in my view, based on, I've been to 19 states looking, and I guess I didn't answer your question because I sort of went off on, but like, how did something like Circle Haven happen and why more of them are happening? This board were people that we all met in national advocacy work, saying like, we want choice, and we're looking at programs and saying, well, what are the indicators? Like, why are these programs, are there like 300 people trying to get the next spot? Why are the families seeking it? Why are the individuals themselves seeking it? And it's very challenging when you have a nonverbal person. And I'm going to give credit to Peter Gerhardt, who like has known my son since he's 3 years old, and to this day still plays a role in his life. That he used to say things like, how do we measure happiness? Now with Andrew, we may have to measure it just in terms of like, are his behaviors going down? Like, he's telling us this isn't working for him. And I have no doubt that if he was stuck in a full job, cleaning tables in Burger King, maybe some other people would be like, oh, that's so great, he's got paid employment. Well, he's got 2 people supporting him and he's having behaviors. He's much happier in his volunteer position, where when he's not having a good day and he has the ability to say all done and we respect it and honor it, and he's not going to lose the job, he's better off. So, how that group got together was a commitment to choice. And then obviously it emerged in terms of looking at models and our core components, where we did want to offer lots of, it's not big, it's only going to be probably like maybe 26 individuals. So it's not a giant thing on the campus itself, but that there's a lot of vibrancy. And that also too, this is another big change at CMS, which I'm so thrilled about. Originally, they said reverse inclusion doesn't count as an inclusive experience. It was like, okay, what? So there's actually a farm community in New Jersey called Oasis, wonderful program. Originally, they were not approved and funded, and now they are for their day program and in some variations on the residents. They have one of the best, most successful programs in terms of bringing the community in. So they do summer breakfasts and they do brunches, which their individuals grow, cook, serve, everything. And you sometimes can't even get a ticket to it because it sells out. So like, here's the community coming and seeing this. Like in the early days, they're like, that doesn't count. I mean, it was nuts. There was one point where New Jersey policymakers actually told them they had 2 farms. They were like, well, they can't live and work at the same place. It was like, well, that's what a farmer does. Well, why don't they just get up and go to the other farm? It was like, what? I can't, like, I'm not going to go get the eggs and the chicken. I'm going to go travel to the other farm just to meet this, facade of inclusion, or, and it's just, we need to look at other measures than just the setting. We have to look at outcome and experience.
I know, yeah, and I agree. Louise has mentioned the happiness is an outcome, which I agree with. I think sometimes just in the transition section at our campus, we look at day programs, and no offense towards any of the day programs, but I feel sometimes there's just not enough of them out there. And then sometimes even with some of our students with more significant behavior challenges, I worry about, the limited measures and supports that will be compared to what we're providing at Yale. And we provide, we try and fade our supports, as they get older in terms of staff ratios and things like that. But sometimes there's so much you can do. And sometimes our individuals are just going to be a bit needy. So to hear, there's something that there's other things out there that are possible for them for happiness. Like you said, versus paid employment, versus if you're going to a food bank, if that's what makes you happy. It's just sometimes knowing and getting that information out to the parents about what is available.
Right. And that's not to diminish that, for some individuals, that's a really important goal, and they derive a lot of, self-fulfillment from it. And in our practice, we represent everyone on the full spectrum. My law partner's on the board of Chesapeake House, which is, serves very, very independent adults. Many who live in their own apartments, many that have paid employment, and it's really more of a social network. So we support, wherever your loved one falls in terms of functioning level. But I do think that it just, and we have to be vigilant. Like, I don't want to give anybody anything else to do, but like, please make sure that you belong to Autism New Jersey, because they don't get the credit that they deserve for how much advocacy work they've done on not only the SDP, but when some advocates came after the private schools, they were a really strong force. Because, why, like, lunch in a crowded high school cafeteria is like a better experience for someone than someone that's learning in an exchange of, one-to-one on how to make a request. I never agreed with. So I would definitely recommend looking at all those websites that are in the presentation, and make sure that you're a member of Autism New Jersey, because they are just a strong force in New Jersey. And I give them so much credit for so many of the things that were really successes in advocacy.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I got a comment. Agreed, and there's somebody who's tired of advocacy groups who don't acknowledge sometimes the lower levels of the spectrum. So I think
well, that's why National Council of Severe Autism was created, because we found that there were 2 problems. One is that there were really forums where families, and sometimes families, I mean, this had never happened to me, but we heard from families that they would be attacked if they described their nonverbal loved one's behaviors. And someone would say, well, wait a second, like, if someone has a seizure, you have to be able to talk about and describe it. Why can't I describe? Well, it's a privacy. Well, there's a balance, but on the other hand, if we are cutting off, then we're cutting off advocacy, because my son couldn't speak at the United Nations, right? So when the speaker before me said, nobody needs a guardian, if you can make a choice, on an iPad, you don't need a guardian. And my response was, my son's not a failure because I'm his guardian, but I need to be his guardian, because when he needed eye surgery, the surgeon was not going to accept him selecting juice versus Cheeto on his iPad as consent to surgery. So, like, let's get real here, So we just, we have to be individualized is really, really what it all comes down to.
One more question, actually from a Yale teacher. He's wonderful, by the way. How does someone begin the process starting a new program, whether it be a farmstead idea, restaurant, landscaping, etc.? I see so many skills my students have, and I would love to be able to create something for post-21. I hear you, Mike.
Well, what we, are generally saying, and, we've worked with a lot of different groups, is that the first step is adult day. right? So diving right into residential can be, you know, a little bit of a, you know, a charge to take on. So, you know, we are definitely seeing many schools that were only schools and now become adult day programs. So there are some that have, you know, created that type of component. I know that even like Reed Academy in Bergen County, they don't have a farm, but they did a hydroponic greenhouse, you know, part of their project. So, you know, it's a really nice product. My son works in a hydroponic greenhouse too. It's like great for our guys because it's like very, very clear and systematic what the task is before you. So I think that is one, you know, way is to look at starting a day program. And I think that, again, those national groups, particularly Together for Choice, like they are such a great resource. You can literally like, you know, find out about other programs and models and designs.
One follow-up question, I've been looking into it and have several ideas for day programs. Is there funding for establishing?
Well, that is a challenge. There is no doubt is that the dollars for day programs, and that's why some providers will actually tell you that they are looking at both because the dollars are better in residential than in, you know, day. So, and again, you know, as a parent, I feel terrible saying this because we have so much to do, you know, in just surviving sometimes. But the truth is, you're not going to have a quality adult services unless you fundraise. It's just not happening. You can go anywhere across the country and take a look at Misericordia, take a look at the Center for Discovery in New York. You know, they're thriving because they do a lot of support in addition to because the public dollars are just not going to do it. You're not going to be able to continue the services. Now, you know, the good news is that there are a lot of dollars out there. Like in the housing area, there is a lot of dollars available, particularly to, you know, for the building funds, the municipal funds. There's an estate housing trust fund now. There's also a lot of the banks, Ford Foundation, a lot of them have selected affordable housing as one of their highest priorities. So we know some projects that are getting low interest loans or forgivable loans. So, you know, in terms of the housing dollars building, there's really been a big increase. But in terms of running the program, which is really the big nut that you have to crack, you do, I mean, many places do have to do an offshoot and do a foundation because to do it well, it costs a lot of money.
And didn't you say too, not to, I know we're running out of time, but it was just so interesting. You said the Brookhaven, it was a lot of philanthropic that helped get it.
Oh yeah, so that program it was really just, you know, a family that pounded the pavement and got other families together, and between running events and, you know, doing capital campaigns, and they literally, I think it was a $17 million project. And it just feels so big when you're starting. So like, to be ending on that note, I don't want to discourage people because, you know, that's sort of scary. Like, how am I going to do this? But to the professionals, to just tell them that like there are funding sources and there are dollars that you can tap. And, you know, I'm more than happy to continue the conversation with Yale too. If you know, are interested in pursuing any of those, direct you to other projects that are, you know, looking at it successfully. I've done that through the years. I can happily say that I convinced some other schools to do adult services, usually with the argument, you can't do all this great work and then let them fall off the cliff. So there, you know, we do this year have a number.
We graduate and we put all the work in. We want to see them go to something quality and stay with them and the families. It's hard to, you know, to let go. And then
absolutely, I'm more than happy to, you know, continue the discussion with Yale and give you a little bit more direction and advice on that.
I so appreciate it. I thought this was wonderful. I can't thank you enough. You're taking your time out for all of this. I'd like to thank everyone. If that's everybody, I think I got all the questions in, and I know Lisa, you've given us a lot of your time, but just to thank everyone for joining us and supporting the spring, again, the spring speaker series. Just a reminder, there is a part 2 of how to manage challenging behaviors in the home on June 16th at 7 p.m. With 2 of our Yale School BCBAs, Andy Rupertone and Joanna Beardsworth. So we look forward to seeing you again. And Lisa, thank you. Can't thank you enough. This was amazing. for the
Well,
second.
I'd like to say thank you to Yale, not only for having me, but for the wonderful work that you do each and every day. I've, sent students your way, and the outcomes have been wonderful.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.